We're here today to welcome Mr. David Brinker, the director of the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art at St. Louis University. MOCRA is the first museum of its kind to focus on the spiritual and religious dimensions in contemporary art. Come May, Mr. Brinker will have been with MOCRA for an auspicious 30 years, first volunteering at the museum as an undergrad, then joining the staff in 1995, and then eventually assuming the role of director in 2016. He has been deeply involved in every aspect of the museum's operations and growth. He has overseen important initiatives such as the MOCRA Voices podcast and curated or co-curated numerous MOCRA exhibitions. His most recent project is To See This Place, Awakening to Our Common Home. This exhibition, co-curated with Al Miner, is currently on display at Fairfield University Art Museum in Connecticut and will come to MOCRA in the fall. Since its inception, MOCRA has championed an expansive culture of interfaith encounters and conversations. It houses not one, but two large-scale permanent installations by the artist Michael Tracy. Today, Mr. Brinker will speak with us about the role of sacred and spiritual imagery in contemporary art, using Michael Tracy's work as a focal point. The talk will be followed by a Q&A session, so if you're interested in asking a question afterwards, please line up at the bottom of either of these staircases where we have mics. If you're not able to make it down to the staircases, just raise your hand and I'll be able to bring a microphone to you. Afterwards, I then invite you all to view our new exhibition, Michael Tracy, The Elegy of Distance, upstairs, which is currently on view from now until until July 27th. But now, without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. David Brinker.
Thank you, Emma. And I just discovered the first typo in my talk, which is actually I've only been director since 2019. So that's on me, not on Emma. But thank you for that gracious introduction. And I'm grateful for the invitation to speak today. And it's a particular honor to be part of the opening events around the new exhibition, Michael Tracy, The Elegy of Distance. I want to thank the many members of the McNay staff whom I've met over the past few days and have made me feel so welcomed. I'm grateful to Renee Barrio, the head of curatorial affairs, for his friendship and encouragement, and to McNay director Matthew McClendon for his support of this renewed focus on the art of Michael Tracy. I give special thanks to Sophia Salinas, SEMS Foundation Fellow in Museum Studies, who has been indispensable in helping me prepare this talk. And finally, I wish to acknowledge Christopher Rincon, president of the Michael Tracy Foundation, and other friends from San Ignacio. Christopher and I have had the opportunity to work together for almost a decade now, and I feel privileged to be here to share this special occasion. So the relationship between contemporary art and the spiritual and religious dimensions is complex and multifaceted, and I'll only be able to scratch the surface today. I'll sketch out some ways of thinking about the sacred and spiritual in contemporary art. Then I'll survey a number of artworks with a particular focus on works from the collection of the museum I direct, the Museum of Contemporary Religious Art at St. Louis University in St. Louis, and the collection here at the McNay. I'll conclude with particular attention to the work of Michael Tracy. First, allow me to tell you a bit about MOCRA, through which I hope to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. Through exhibitions, collections, and programs, MOCRA highlights and explores the ways contemporary visual artists engage with the religious and spiritual dimensions. Our approach is both expansive and inclusive. We seek to facilitate personal discovery, experience, and inspiration while contributing to a wider culture of interfaith encounter and dialogue. You might guess from the exterior architecture that the building MOCRA inhabits had a previous life. And indeed, it's housed in the Fuse Memorial Chapel, part of a complex that was originally built in the 1950s as a house of studies for Jesuits at St. Louis University. So St. Louis U, or SLU, is a Catholic Jesuit university. The Jesuits sold the building to the university around 1990, and the university leadership approved the proposal of our founding director, Jesuit priest Father Terrence Dempsey, to adapt the chapel space for a museum. And after a significant renovation, MOCRA opened on Valentine's Day in 1993. So here are installation views of a few of the 70-some exhibitions we've presented over the years. We have shown works by artists ranging from Alvin Ailey to Andy Warhol, representing cultural and religious perspectives including Australian Aboriginal, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Taoism, Judaism, and various Christian denominations, as well as artists who do not disclose who do not disclose what, if any, religious beliefs they hold, but who are engaged in a sustained dialogue with the religious and spiritual dimensions. Museums get their starts in different ways: a collector with a particular passion for a subject, or a community that wants to remember and understand its history. Father Dempsey, who, as I said, retired in 2019, jokes that he is probably the only person to have turned a dissertation into a museum. Father Dempsey began his doctoral studies in 1985 at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He closely examined the work of 11 contemporary artists, including Michael Tracy, whose varied approaches seemed to him representative of the ways today's artists might engage with the religious and spiritual dimensions in their work. This research and the many artists he came in contact with helped shape MOCRA's early exhibitions and the nucleus of the museum's collection. In his dissertation, Father Dempsey proposed characteristics that might be evident in contemporary spiritual and religious artwork. And indeed, definitions are important, as a frequent criticism is that spirituality is such a broad and squishy term that it runs the risk of becoming meaningless. So, what do we mean when we speak of the sacred, of the spiritual, of the religious? A classic description of religious experience comes from German theologian and philosopher Rudolf Otto, which he referred to with the term numinous. According to Otto, numinous experiences have three simultaneous qualities, which he called mysterium, tremendum, et fascinans. As mysterium, or mystery, these experiences are a revelation of a power that is wholly other. As tremendum, terrifying or fearful, these experiences evoke feelings of awe, of being overpowered, of an awareness of creatureliness or dependency, and a sense of urgency. As fascinans, fascinating, these experiences are attractive, desirable, comforting, and lead to a sense of perfect fullness or bliss. Another scholar of religions, Mircea Eliade, similarly used the notion of the holy other to distinguish the sacred from the profane as two modes of being in the world. Despite this categorical difference, the sacred may be manifested in certain places, objects, rituals, and symbols. These, quote, breakthroughs of the sacred into the world, which Eliade termed hierophanies, are points of communication between our everyday experience and the sacred. In the biblical tradition, we might think of Moses and the burning bush as such a privileged moment of encounter. Of course, we live in a time when traditional religious practices are not taken for granted, and where images from the early moments of the universe brought to us by the Hubble telescope are more likely to inspire a sense of mysterium tremendum. At the Jesuit university where I work, many students describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. When speaking to class groups visiting MOCRA, I take this now common phrase as a way of framing the topic. After all, it implies that the spiritual and the religious are related, yet distinguishable. So I invite the students to imagine a Venn diagram, if you remember those, and surprisingly, they all do. It's great. First, I ask them what we might put in the category of spirituality, and typically the responses include things like an awareness of something or someone greater than ourselves that cannot be fully grasped, yet is not wholly unknowable, an appreciation for the mystery of being human, a sense of connectedness and responsibility for other people as well as for the natural world, and various practices that facilitate entering into a spiritual state of awareness. At their best, spiritual experiences are transformational and open us to an awareness of greater possibilities, to a sense of hope and of gratitude. Then I ask them what we might put in the category of religion, above and beyond what has already been mentioned. The responses typically include structures that facilitate sharing a spirituality in common, such as shared stories or myths, specific beliefs and codes of conduct, special meals, attire, vessels, and practices often associated with specific holy times and places. I'm, of course, painting in very broad strokes here, as there is great variability across times and cultures and other ways of defining what religion is. Still, I think this outline will serve for our purposes today. There are artists situated in any and all parts of this diagram, and I invite you to keep these characteristics in mind as we look at various artworks. Although art making has been associated with spiritual and religious experience from the earliest days of humanity, The idea of contemporary religious or spiritual art is often viewed with skepticism by members of both the art world and communities of faith. But is this mutual ambivalence as pervasive and persistent as is commonly assumed? In her 2014 book, The Spiritual Dynamic in Modern Art, Charlene Spretnak makes the case that, quote, one cannot fully grasp the complexity and depth of modern and contemporary art if the spiritual dimension is ignored, denied, downplayed, or dismissed, end quote. Other recent books arguing for a similar interrogation of the prevailing narrative include Spiritual Moderns, 20th Century American Artists and Religion by Erica Voss, and The Other Side, A Story of Women in Art and the Spirit World by Jennifer Higgy. Since the 1980s, there have been significant exhibitions at major museums that follow a similar line of thought. Here are just a few notable examples. I have Google search alerts set for the terms contemporary religious art and spiritual art, which results in related articles showing up in my inbox almost every day. They concern artists and exhibitions all over the world, at museums of all sizes, at community art centers and in faith communities, not to mention artist-run organizations and juried competitions. So, having established that exploring the religious and spiritual dimensions in contemporary art is not a fringe pursuit, we have to ask, how do we identify such artwork? I'd like to share with you two recent approaches to this question. The first comes from Aaron Rosen, former director of the Luce Center for the Arts and Religion in Washington, D.C. In his 2015 book, Art and Religion in the 21st Century, Rosen organizes works by over 200 artists from across the globe according to theological, philosophical, cultural, sociological, anthropological, and phenomenological perspectives. In this way, Rosen encourages us to be expansive in our thinking about the ways religion and spirituality might be implicit or explicit in contemporary art. Another approach is found in Encountering the Spiritual in Contemporary Art, edited by Lisa K. Fanning, who at the time was curator of contemporary art at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City. Like Rosen, Fanning and her contributing authors group art in broad categories, mostly along cultural and religious lines, along with some thematic ideas that cut across the other categories. This afternoon, I too am going to take a categorical approach, although time prevents me from being as comprehensive as Rosen and Fanning are. I'm also setting 3 parameters. First, I'm going to highlight primarily works from the MOCRA and McNay collections. Second, I'm going to focus on art that is not produced for religious or devotional purposes, although I do want to acknowledge that there are outstanding contemporary examples of such art. Third, I'm not going to touch on the role of scandal or controversy sometimes generated by artworks that engage with religion. Such works may offend some people's sensibilities, and indeed, sometimes that may be the aim. But often they are more complicated and nuanced than you might think from the headlines. This is not to say that we're only going to look at safe art. Indeed, religious and spiritual motifs can be powerful vehicles for strong critique. So, without further delay, let's look at some examples. So, many of the symbols, metaphors, and stories of traditional religion are still broadly recognizable, allowing artists to employ them, trusting that people will make a connection. In fact, the Oppenheimer galleries here at the McNay do a wonderful job of putting historical religious art into dialogue with contemporary works, and I commend Renee and the curatorial team for their keen eyes. Let's begin with a couple of works on display there now. The image of Mary with the Christ child is a familiar one. At left, we see a German sculpture from the 1400s. At right, a New Mexican retablo from the 1800s. Despite the stylistic differences, the essentials persist, including various symbolic elements such as Mary's crown and the crescent moon upon which she stands. Now consider this version by the late artist Frederick J. Brown. This Madonna and Child is the first of 5 panels in the Life of Christ altarpiece, which was commissioned for MOCRA. While clearly grounded in traditional portrayals of Mary, Brown's depiction is influenced by his African American and Choctaw ancestry and the influence of the German Expressionists. Perhaps most notable is Mary's face, which in its impassivity evokes both Egyptian mummy masks and Byzantine icons. This next work is by Southern California artist Laurie Gross. The Hebrew word rachamin is typically translated into English as mercy or compassion. However, the secondary title of this, as the secondary title of the work suggests, the word derives from raham, meaning womb. Compassion, then, is like the love without bounds of a mother for her child, the deepest knowing and connection of one being with another. Gross's sculpture distills the essence of this intimate relationship with fabric that evokes a talit, or Jewish prayer shawl. This elegant minimalist painting by Chicago-based Dan Ramirez takes us far away from the naturalism of the Virgin and Child with pomegranate. Yet Ramirez's gracefully arcing lines recall the vaulting of Gothic cathedrals. An almost undetectable shift of perspective throughout Celestis Praecipe, which is Latin for celestial manger, draws us in and suspends us in space and time, forming an environment of harmony and grace conducive to quiet contemplation of the mystery of the incarnation of Jesus. Portrayals of Mary as docile handmaiden, loving mother, or brave agent of revolution all coexist and find expression in art. This work, Maria, is part of a series in which Brooklyn-based photographer and performance artist Martine reinterprets historical and mythological women. V.S. Wells proposes that Martine's choice, quote, to embody different real or mythical women is a transgressive act by itself. As a transgender woman with indigenous ancestry, she's not who many people would imagine when you think of these figures, close quote. Among the most culturally significant titles for Mary in the Americas is Our Lady of Guadalupe, seen in this retablo from the McNay collection, surrounded by smaller images from the story about her miraculous appearances to St. Juan Diego. The silhouette of the Virgin of Guadalupe, framed within an almond-shaped mandorla, is instantly recognizable in Thoughts and Prayers, a dazzling work by the De La Torre brothers. The shifting lenticular images and exuberant ornamentation remind us that St. Juan Diego had a visionary experience, which must have been disorienting and overwhelming. How does one express the indescribable? The De La Torre brothers have commented, quote, decoration is often used as a narrative device. Repetitive symbols, archetypes, and floral imagery tell a story rather than simply being picturesque, close quote. The Virgin appears in this untitled painting within a painting by Nivea Gonzalez. Like the Virgin hovering in a timeless golden realm, the painting itself suggests a moment of pause and reverie. Open-ended symbolism, including a crescent moon that echoes the one the Virgin stands upon, food set upon the table like an ofrenda, and the open window shutter beckon us into mystery. A surprising range of contemporary artists make reference to the Stations of the Cross, or Via Crucis, a traditional Christian devotion centering on a series of events from the day of Jesus' death. Believers move from station to station, pausing to meditate on each scene. Today, stations are typically encountered on paintings or plaques, as plaques with paintings or sculptures mounted on the walls of a church. Something about the stories contained within the stations, as well as the practice of movement and contemplation, seems to attract artists. So let's look at examples of a few of the stations. The first station is Jesus being condemned to die by the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate. This example comes from the Catholic Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Portland, Maine. As you might recognize, a fairly traditional portrayal. New Jersey-based artist Doug DePice draws on historical source photos to construct this drawing concerning the struggle for human rights and social justice in Central America. His primary source is a photograph of an ice cream vendor being used as a human shield by a member of the National Police during a skirmish in San Salvador in February 1980. He also incorporates figures from a photo of the firebombing of a Freedom Riders bus in Alabama during the U.S. Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. DePice invests the work with a Christian reading wherein the captive merchant represents Jesus and the officers become modern-day Roman soldiers. The sense of being there challenges us to ponder whether we identify with prisoner, bystander, or police. The sixth station is Veronica wiping the face of Jesus. In this non-scriptural story, Veronica is moved with compassion and steps out of the crowd to wipe sweat and blood and grime from Jesus' face. As with Mary on St. Juan Diego's tilma, Jesus' image is miraculously imprinted on the cloth. Guatemalan-born artist Luis González Palma is one of Latin America's most significant contemporary photographers. Frequently, his subjects are Guatemala's indigenous Maya, who have endured centuries of violence and indignity, but who fiercely preserve and promote their cultural heritage. González Palma's work is strongly evocative of paintings by Spanish artist Francisco de Soberón. Here, printed on a cloth that is stained and worn with signs of use, a mature Maya bearing a thorny crown looks directly at the viewer in a way that speaks of profound dignity. We might ask ourselves, are our eyes open to see those who suffer in our midst, and how have we responded? I recently received the sad news that artist Daniel Goldstein passed away in early January. His artistic legacy includes the Found Object Icarian series. In the early 1990s, Goldstein acquired discarded leather covers from the exercise benches at a gym in San Francisco's Castro district, frequented by many gay men who were impacted by the AIDS pandemic. Goldstein mounted the leather unaltered in cases that serve as shipping crate, display case, and reliquary. The images suggesting human forms and faces were created completely by the perspiration and physical presence of the many men who used the benches. The 13th station is Jesus being brought down from the cross, often referred to as the deposition. A related image is known as the Pietà, Italian for pity or compassion, that focuses on Mary mourning over her son's lifeless body. And the best-known version, of course, is Michelangelo's, now at St. Peter's in Rome. In his photographic series, Musas Muxe, Mexican artist Nelson Morales explores the lives and perspectives of the Muxes in his native community in Oaxaca. In the local Zapotec culture, the Muxes are broadly considered a third gender, consisting of individuals who are born male but define themselves as women. Our piety invites us to expand our understanding of family and of love, and to confront the discrimination and very real suffering often experienced by those who don't fit neatly into prevailing norms of gender and sexuality. Chicago-based sculptor Thomas Skomsky manipulates industrial materials in ways that reveal a deeper reality, a pursuit reflective of his practice of Zen Buddhism. Skomsky's interpretation of the Pietà is a cage constructed from wood, painted black, and covered with textured and dripped applications of wax. For reference, it's about 8 feet tall and about 6 feet square. Inside is a precariously balanced slack sheet of thin steel covered with dried blood. Lights are aimed at the cage in a way that fills MOCRA's balcony gallery with shadows that envelop viewers, drawing them into the drama of vulnerability, suffering, death, and compassion. Fittingly, Skomsky has described this work as, quote, the shadow side of the Pietà, close quote. The 14th and final station is Jesus being laid in the tomb. One of the most compelling representations of this motif is found in Hans Holbein the Younger's life-size painting of the entombed Christ. The unflinching realism of the emaciated body and the claustrophobic dimensions of the painting contribute to its powerful effect. And perhaps these qualities have drawn today's artists to engage with this painting in their own work. In this maquette, or model, for a work by Cuban-American artist Juan González, Holbein's dead Christ is set against a stormy sky. A wreath of white roses is suspended above. González noted that for Latin Americans, the white rose is a sign of hope in a time of adversity. The title, Don't Mourn, Consecrate, takes on significance when we understand the context of the full-size version of this work, which was as one of the earliest public artworks on the topic of AIDS. It was first shown in September 1987 in the street front windows of New York University's Gray Art Gallery, now Gray Art Museum. Accompanying the artwork was a scroll with a cumulative list of the weekly U.S. death tolls during the period of the installation. González gave the work and the maquette to Father Dempsey for the MOCRA collection, and the full-scale version became the anchoring work for MOCRA's 1994 exhibition, Consecrations, the Spiritual in Art in the Time of AIDS. Most recently, it was shown in Father Dempsey's final exhibition that he curated, which was called Gratitude. Here are 4 panels of a 5-panel series by Australian artist Ian Friend, each one the exact dimensions of the Holbein painting. The title of the series, The Protestant Affliction, is drawn from a 1988 essay by cultural theorist Julia Kristeva. By breaking down the body of Christ into its simplest geometric forms, Friend suggests the decay that is implicit in physical death. But the varying brushstrokes and subtle color variations remind us that out of the tomb comes possibility, recreation, and transformation. Houston-based and San Antonio native, Vincent Valdez's series Stations loosely transposes the rhythms of the traditional stations into the realm of boxing, thus shifting the focus of our contemplation from divine redemption to masculine rites of passage and the spiritual nature of our struggles against our fears. A viewer might understand this moment in the boxer's saga as defeat, humiliation, even death, and yet, in the context of Christ's death and resurrection, or of the transformation experienced during rites of passage in the classic hero's journey, this may be a necessary moment of letting go in order to move on to a new stage of life. Portland, Oregon-based artist Horatio Law makes the burial cloths of Jesus the central interpretive element of his 14th station for A Way of the Cross in the time of AIDS. Remnants evokes the Shroud of Turin, a cloth reputed to be the burial cloth of Jesus. Law created his work in 1992 to honor a close friend who had been recently diagnosed HIV positive. The artist used his own body to imprint a ghostly silhouette, expressing his sorrow, pain, and sense of loss at his friend's suffering. Law says that his ritualistic attempt to heal his friend by making this work resulted, to his surprise, in his own spiritual healing. The Spanish word sudario, or shroud, can be used to refer both to the Veronica veil and Jesus' burial wrappings. This double meaning infuses this work by Colombian artist Erika Dietes. In 2011, she set up a studio in the Colombian province of Antioquia, where she interviewed at length and photographed women who were forced to witness the torture and killing of loved ones. Printed on large silk panels and suspended at different heights, Dietes describes them as, quote, testaments to dignity and to the twin desires of seeking justice and honoring the dead, close quote. In this sense, Sudarios also embraces elements of the Pietà. The artist says her work is not only an honoring of the stories of these women or the memory of those they lost, but also, quote, to the way in which life reshapes and restructures itself and continues in spite of itself, close quote. As seen in the Stations, one of the profoundest realities we wrestle with as humans is death. And there is a long tradition of artworks that remind us of and help us meditate on that reality. In Western art, this motif is referred to as memento mori, literally in Latin, remember that you have to die. It is often signaled by the presence of a skull in a painting. Here are two examples from the McNay collection. In José Aragon's portrayal, Santa Rosalia holds a skull and a cross, symbols of both death and triumph over death. It's noteworthy that Rosalia is invoked in times of plague, and reportedly some citizens of Palermo invoked her protection during the COVID-19 pandemic. Macabre is an apt description for Eugene Berman's disturbing take on the memento mori, with its unsettling color palette of greens, teals, browns, and yellows. This example by Los Angeles-based Jim Morphesis is more expressionistic. In fact, drawn in by the highly textured surface, some visitors to MOCRA don't even realize that the image is a skull until they see the work from across the gallery. The dramatic and gestural handling of paint on a ground of splintered wood causes the image to break down the closer the viewer approaches, echoing the process of decomposition. Meanwhile, the subtle use of greens and blues suggests the possibility of transformation and renewed existence. There is a school of theology and spirituality called the via negativa, the way of negation. Since it's impossible for human language to fully or accurately describe God, this approach seeks to create an indirect portrait of God by focusing on what God is not. Erwin Wurm's dust sculptures are in a sense sculptures of what is absent. The impression of the object left from the deposited dust that accumulated around it reduces the sculpture to what Wurm calls the, quote, point zero of sculpture. These works may serve as a visual meditation on our attempts to hold on to memories and the inescapable impermanence of life. Wrestling with the nature of suffering and impermanence is a core element of Buddhism, explored by Bay Area artist Louis de Soto in his work Parinirvana. De Soto patterned this inflatable reclining Buddha in death on the 46-foot wide Parinirvana sculpture at Galvahara in Sri Lanka. Though De Soto's version was created as a memorial to his father, he explores his own mortality and how he might meet it by painting his own face on the Buddha. The contingency of life is signaled by the fact that the statue is kept inflated by a continuously running blower. A popular theme in religious art is the representation of holy figures, including saints, and today's artists continue to find them fascinating subjects. Adrian Kellard expressed in his work his experiences as an Irish-Italian Catholic gay man loved by God. Kellard incorporated religious imagery into everyday objects, often functional, in a way that is playful without being irreverent. This work quotes a painting by El Greco of St. Martin and the Beggar. The 4th century saint was a soldier in Constantine's army. One winter day, while on campaign, Martin encountered a beggar suffering from the cold. In an act of compassion, the saint sliced through his own cloak and gave half to the beggar. That night, Martin dreamed of Jesus wearing the half cloak he had given away. This artwork doubles as a functioning coat rack, which once hung in Kellard's New York apartment, and you'll notice that the hooks are enclosed in carved hearts. This next work by New York-based artist Gabriel Garcia Roman was featured in Open Hands Crafting the Spiritual, a recent MOCRA exhibition guest curated by the McNay's own Renee Barrio. And I'm grateful to Renee for bringing Garcia Roman's work to my attention. I also want to give a shout out to Janelle Esparza, the McNay's head of education, who was also an artist in Open Hands. This work comes from Garcia Roman's Queer Icons series, which he says, quote, are drawn from many facets of the gender and queer spectrum, and these images give visibility to a population that's generally underrepresented in the art world. Finding inspiration in portraiture styles of Renaissance, Flemish, and Christian Orthodox paintings, the series aims to elevate these multidimensional, powerful, and proud contemporary figures, close quote. Elements of traditional icons are merged with photographs and text authored by the portrait's subjects to offer insights into each individual's story. We can find examples of Garcia Roman's inspirations here at the McNay, including this portrait by Jan Gossert, in which Anna de Berg's clothing and accessories speak to her learning and economic standing. The work by Garcia Roman also calls to mind the motif of the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. We've already seen a number of examples from the McNay's rich holdings of works from the Santero tradition, which refers to a distinctive New Mexican school of Catholic religious imagery that first flourished from the mid-18th to late 19th centuries and thrives again today. I'd like to present works by 2 Albuquerque-based artists with close ties to the Santero tradition. Vicente Tellez began painting traditional retablos, or panel paintings, using handmade pigments and gesso, but his style has evolved to include experimentation with different media, as well as reinterpretations of traditional Catholic and cultural iconography to address contemporary social concerns. In his painting Our Lady of Chimayo Hill, Tellez reworks a famous Bolivian image of Our Lady of Cerro Rico, a mountain outside of Potosi that is still mined for silver even today. His focus here, however, is Chimayo, New Mexico, a Catholic pilgrimage site. But the sacredness of this site stretches back for time immemorial to the Tewa people of the region. Tellez says, quote, thinking about finding common ground and what can bring us together rather than divide, I created this visual representation of the stories and peoples that comprise the sacredness of Chimayo, close quote. In recent years, Brandon Maldonado has immersed himself in research on classic santos and their makers. Maldonado notes, quote, this piece employs a cubist style that I have developed for the past decade. It is a depiction of a santero or saint maker typical to the northern New Mexico villages. At the core, there is a love for abstraction and simplification by its practitioners nearly a century before Picasso and abstraction came into vogue. The composition of this piece is broken up into several small panels which form the overall image. The assemblage attempts to mimic a cluster of retablos in the way they are commonly hung. So thus far, our focus has largely been on works that employ figurative or narrative elements. We'll shift now to works that tend more toward abstraction, and the first of these foreground text as their primary element. Kazuaki Tanahashi was born in Japan and resides in the Bay Area. He is known for paintings made with a single brush stroke, which record both the intention and the energy expended to make the mark. In one, referring to what Tanahashi calls the, quote, mother of all strokes in East Asian calligraphy, close quote, the white paint vividly rends the black void of the canvas, suggesting the powerful forces unleashed by the creative act. Salma Arastu was born in the northern Indian state of Rajasthan and now resides in the Bay Area. Raised in the Hindu tradition, Arastu converted to Islam upon her marriage to her husband. This led to a fascination with the sinuous Arabic script. In Healing Prayer, Arastu brings the beauty and elegance of Arabic calligraphy into dialogue with Western modern art movements like abstract expressionism and color field painting. Her text is a passage from the Quran, one that she believes reflects a positive, universal message. She provides this English translation, quote, "Who listens to the soul distressed when it calls on him, and who relieves its suffering." New York-based Susan Schwab is one of the foremost practitioners of silver point drawing, in which a silver rod or wire is dragged across a prepared surface. In contrast to the traditional use of silver point for figurative imagery, Schwab's work is resolutely abstract, and her handling of the technique is highly innovative. Creation number 3 comes from a series inspired by the celebrated Sarajevo Haggadah, which contains the traditional texts recited at the Passover Seder. Schwab was drawn to the Haggadah's illuminations representing the creation of the world, and her own work suggests the creative energies active at the birth of the cosmos. Born in Pakistan, New York-based Shazia Sikander infuses personal symbolism into varied sources, including the religious traditions of Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. In this early work, 3 images are superimposed over texts in Urdu and English. Prominent is a blue form that appears frequently in Sikander's work, one that curator Ainsley M. Cameron describes as, quote, "a figure of empowerment and strength," referencing her own experience but also that of the feminine encounter more broadly. A self-sustaining figure, self-reflective and self-referential, but one who is hindered and isolated from experience, close quote. A 2018 visit to the McNay was my introduction to the work of Leslie Dill, specifically the stunning red ecstasy dress. Based in Brooklyn, Dill works at the intersection of language and fine art in printmaking, sculpture, installation, and performance. She is deeply interested in faith and spirituality and the possibility of awakening viewers to the physical intimacy and power of language itself. A strong current in Dill's work is visionary experience, discernible in both the red ecstasy dress and vision catcher. She recalls, quote, "When I was 14, I woke up one day and looked out my bedroom window. The oak leaves hadn't fallen from the trees. Suddenly, my screen went black and I felt a swoon, not a fainting, just an, oh. My mental eye filled with strands of light. I was given to see murder and defilement along with beauty and grace, and I understood them," close quote. In recent years, Dill has explored the lives and writings of American poets, speakers, religious visionaries, and abolitionists, and the contradictions that often mark their lives. One of these subjects is Anne Hutchinson, who convened weekly meetings at her Boston home in which she articulated theological positions that put her at odds with colonial religious and political leaders, as well as the patriarchal social order. Put on trial in 1637, she asserted that her knowledge came directly from God, saying, quote, "So to me, by an immediate revelation, by the voice of his own spirit to my soul." In art, the sublime refers to the force that inspires a sense of awe and makes us aware of our own creaturehood and of forces beyond our power to control. Associated with 19th century artists such as Caspar David Friedrich, J.M.W. Turner, and Frederick Church, the sublime continues to make its presence known in works by artists today. New York artist Toby Kahn is interested in the intersection between memory and place. The forms in his paintings register as landscapes, although with ambiguous, shifting relationships between the foreground and background. As in his finished paintings, Kahn achieves the subtle, dense colors in this study for Otsa by applying acrylic paint first in vibrant opaque layers, then translucent washes. Kahn's titles are invented words, ambiguous but evocative, inviting us to make associations just as the painted images jog recognition. Trinidadian-American artist Gary Logan draws visual and conceptual inspiration from both Taoism and Romantic tradition in painting. Logan links dark matter to the experience of walking through a volcanic lava field in northern Iceland, a natural manifestation of creativity and rebirth from destruction. Yet the painting also explores concept of decolonization and blackness. Logan connects the hypothesis that dark matter accounts for about 85% of all matter in the universe with his discovery that 85% of his DNA is derived from African ancestors. The painting's matte background, representing the negativity of a past devastated by slavery and oppression, contrasts with glossy masses that signal a vibrant Black identity resulting from the conjoining of oppression and rebirth. The late Frank LaPeña was descended from the indigenous Wintu people of Northern California, but was cut off from his cultural heritage at a young age when he and his sister were taken from their mother and placed in an Indian boarding school. As a young man, LaPeña began searching for his roots and became interested in the song, dance, and ceremonial traditions of his tribe. He became a leader in the revival and preservation of native arts. One of the Wintu people's most sacred sites is North Mountain, also known as Mount Shasta. This 14,000-foot volcanic mountain is a place of great power where members of the Wintu journey to seek counsel and answers. On one visit, LaPeña had a vision of a great circle in the sky, and inside the circle, a bird form. This painting is a visual translation of that experience. The dreaming is a term applied to a complex of Australian Aboriginal beliefs. It is most commonly understood to express a creation time when ancestor heroes traveled the land, creating sacred sites and sometimes becoming one with the landscape. However, it also implies unbroken continuity with Aboriginal people today, guiding their relationship with the land, shaping moral codes, and transmitting cultural knowledge. As a senior elder of the Anmat-Yare people in Central Australia, Ada Bird-Pet-Yare was a custodian for many dreamings, including the mountain devil lizard, a central figure in the Anmat-Yare dreaming that symbolizes the creation of the desert landscape. This silkscreen makes reference to that dreaming and the women's ceremonial body paint designs associated with it. The final broad area we will look at concerns references to sacred architecture, rituals, and objects. Madison-based Michael Veliket is another artist featured in Open Hands, Crafting the Spiritual. His exquisite, meticulously crafted paper sculptures are like the manifestation of a mandala. All of the paper used in these sculptures is hand cut. And Veliket notes, quote, "It's very slow and deliberate work." It's about concentration and awareness. They are contemplative objects in the sense I intend for viewers to lose themselves in the experience of looking at them. This model for a dump truck by Belgian artist Wim Delvoye is not simply ornamented in a florid Gothic style. Rather, the ornamentation forms the structure of the truck. Without all that filigree, there would be no object. I will confess, I am not entirely sure where I might place Delvoye along a continuum from artists making a commentary on religion to those engaging in genuine inquiry. Still, an important figure in many spiritual and religious traditions is the trickster, a boundary crosser of great intellect and craft who often defies conventional norms. The trickster may be irritating, even dangerous, but often is a figure who is essential to contact with the sacred dimensions. And perhaps Wim Delvoye plays this role in our contemporary art scene. Another artist in Open Hands is Thomas Lanigan-Schmidt. These works making reference to Roman Catholic liturgical objects are deeply rooted in Lanigan-Schmidt's memories of being an altar boy during his New Jersey childhood, but they also employ a distinct queer aesthetic. The artist crafts his chalices and other ritual objects from tin foil, cellophane, plastic jewels, pipe cleaners, and ephemera. He told Father Dempsey, quote, "It is not the gold, but the glow that counts," close quote. It was fitting that at MOCRA we were able to display the chalices on altars that were formerly used for celebrating Mass. I am more than a little jealous that the McNay is now home to 3 magnificent chalices, especially the one with the bees. When I visited the McNay in 2018, a survey of Dario Robleto's work titled "Ancient Beacons Long for Notice" captivated my imagination. The San Antonio natives' refusal to acknowledge artificial boundaries between art and science has led to works like this one comprising a wide range of natural and industrial materials. Indeed, Robleto refers to himself as a, quote, "materialist poet." The first thing that came to my mind when I saw this work was a Catholic liturgical vessel called a monstrance, which is used to hold and display a consecrated host. In Robleto's work, the topmost disc incorporates drawings of the surface of the moon and of a solar eclipse, perhaps suggestive of the human search for meaning and mystery throughout the cosmos. In a lovely coincidence of wordplay, the crescent or disc shaped holder for the host in a monstrance is called a lunette, which is the French diminutive for moon. The multifaceted Griffin Black Swan combined pride in his African American heritage with an interest in Asian aesthetics to create eloquent apparel. He believed that clothing can be a carrier of powerful emotional energy and a sense of identity, and in his fashion design, he aimed to capture the spirit of the person for whom the clothing was being made. Father Dempsey commissioned Black Swan to create this chasuble, a vestment worn by a Catholic priest during Mass, for the 1994 MOCRA exhibition, Consecrations, the Spiritual and Art in the Time of AIDS. The gold, black, and purple silks on the front create intricate patterns inspired by Seminole patchwork. Black Swan often reserved his most intricate designs for the back side of the garments, encouraging the viewer to actively engage with the garment to experience it fully. This chasuble's backside includes a calla lily associated with purity, a rock suggesting faithfulness, stability, and refuge, and water associated with baptism and rebirth. Maria Magdalena Campos Pons is a leading artist of the Afro-Cuban diaspora. Recurring themes in her work include maintaining ties with the people and land of Cuba, the special character and role of women's discourse in society, and the nature of family communication. This exuberant work evokes the Cuban religious tradition of espiritismo, or spiritism. Shakara may be exclaimed when a medium experiences a jolt or current in their body that indicates the presence of a spirit or spiritual force. Clothing, adornments, and objects found in Campos Pons' images carry multivalent meanings and are often associated with orishas, traditional Yoruban deities who are syncretized with Christian saints in Santeria and other blended religions in the Caribbean. This large assemblage was made by Pittsburgh-based artist and community activist Vanessa German during the COVID-19 pandemic. Appropriate to the moment, Black Girl with Snakes references themes of rebirth, rejuvenation, and hope in times of uncertainty and loss. We can spot elements of African tribal ritual, Catholic devotions, mythology, the natural world, and items from everyday life. What German terms a power figure presides from the center of the work. German sources a wide range of objects, many found on walks around her neighborhood, to create these power figures. She relies on the, quote, frequency of yes, or entering into her artistic flow to guide the selection and placement of the elements. Born in Cuba and raised in New York, Ernesto Pujol has a significant history with McNay, including his work Walk Number 1, which premiered here in 2006. Levitation is from Pujol's series Hagiography. Literally meaning holy writing, it's the term given to recountings of the lives of the saints. This series consists of a tableau of men and women immersed in religious faith and practice. Here, Pujol himself is dressed in the habit of a discalced Carmelite. In the three frames of the photograph, the background becomes progressively blurred, suggesting he is rising higher and higher. This is perhaps a reference to Saint Teresa of Avila, the 16th century mystic whose intense spiritual experiences included levitation during prayer. You may be familiar with Bernini's renowned sculpture of the mystic saint in ecstasy. While humorous, the work is not mocking. Pujol spent several years as a cloistered monk following college, an experience that has informed his art. New York-based artist Jordan Eagles uses blood, in this case cow's blood, to evoke reflection on the corporeal and spiritual, on the scientific and the mystical, on mortality and regeneration. Eagles employs a variety of techniques in the creation of his art, and even the very processes by which he prepares his medium show a ritualistic sensibility. He layers the blood at different densities and heats, burns, and ages it. Here, the incorporation of copper associated with electrical conductivity imparts a fiery, energetic sensibility to the piece. So I'll conclude my talk today with a look at three works by Michael Tracy, found in the MOCRA collection. This is not only because of the Elegy of Distance, newly opened here at the McNay, but because Tracy's work exemplifies many of the qualities and approaches seen in the works I have just surveyed. Tracy was deeply versed in the Catholic iconography and theology of both Europe and the Americas. A, quote, marriage of Mexico and Italy, as Christopher Rincon writes in his poignant exhibition essay. Tracy was as fluent in the language of abstraction and absence as that of exuberant materiality. His works are marked by restless intellect, humanism, and passion for social justice, and a keen sense of the power of art and ritual in unmasking the deeper currents of history and society. I see Tracy as a hierophant, presiding at the border between the sacred and the profane, able to express the mysterium tremendum et fascinans like few other artists I can think of. Art historian Peter Sells observed, quote, "Michael Tracy's work, vibrating with emotion, confronts the viewer with a combination of beauty and terror." Close quote. Tracy is deeply embedded in the DNA of MOCRA. He was one of the artists Father Dempsey profiled in his dissertation, and they first met in person when Father Dempsey went to see Michael's Terminal Privileges exhibition at MoMA PS1 in 1987. By 1991, Father Dempsey was in conversation with Tracy about displaying his triptych comprising the 11th, 12th, and 13th Stations of the Cross for Latin America, La Pasión, at MOCRA when the museum opened. The 10th station from the same series is on display in the Elegy of Distance. Traditionally, the station portrays Jesus being stripped of his garments, as in this example from the San Fernando Cathedral downtown. As you can see, Tracy's treatment of the subject is quite distinctive. Father Dempsey has always expressed gratitude for Tracy's willingness to lend not only his art, but his artistic reputation to the fledgling MOCRA. The trust and, one might say, courage of Tracy and those other early artists lent credibility that signaled MOCRA as a serious endeavor. And in 2016, Tracy generously made a gift to the triptych to the MOCRA collection. After the work was displayed at the Southeast Center for Contemporary Art in 1991, it was shipped to St. Louis, but kept in storage until the space at MOCRA was ready for it in early 1993. In order to get the work into the building, a loading dock door was punched into the west wall of the chapel. As you can see here, it was quite an undertaking to lift the work, bring it into the space, and install it on a support wall that was built in front of the existing mosaic on the back wall of the museum. Obviously, this was commitment on both parties' part. So, read from left to right, the triptych encompasses the 11th, 12th, and 13th Stations of the Cross, or respectively, Jesus is nailed to the cross, Jesus dies on the cross, and Jesus is brought down from the cross. Thus, the triptych, or three-panel work, joins together the climactic events in Jesus' passion in a format evocative of Catholic altarpieces, a format also employed in various works in the Elegy of Distance, such as this work dedicated to the artist's father. Instead of a figurative representation, Tracy mixes nails, shattered tableware, and other items into congealing paint to create a landscape of pain, suffering, sacrifice, and redemption. Father Dempsey likens it to coming across a scene just after an unspeakable act of violence has occurred. Tracy commissioned a Mexican artist to create a large hammered tin corona, or crown in Spanish, that was added to the work when it was installed at MOCRA. To my eye, it serves as a proscenium arch, framing and drawing our attention to the scene below it. At the same time, with its suggestions of motifs from cultures that flourished in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans, the corona signals the conflicts and complexities of the colonial legacy, an expression of what art critic Lisa Liebman calls, quote, the quality of deep time that Tracy wants his work to hold, close quote. I have spoken about this work to hundreds, perhaps thousands of people. I sometimes ask them to imagine that Tracy had painted a traditional crucifixion scene. Even at this enormous scale, I doubt most people would spend much time looking at it. Our minds would likely quickly register the scene, say, I know what that is, and move on. Continuing the thought experiment, I ask, well, what if he were to portray the people in culturally specific clothing? Something common enough in medieval and Renaissance religious art. But such a work would be time-bound and perhaps fail to connect with people unfamiliar with the culture. So perhaps this was Tracy's only viable path to an enduring contemporary expression of the Stations. And indeed, it has spoken to generations of visitors who knew nothing about El Salvador in the 1980s, but knew about the Balkans, or Rwanda, or Northern Ireland, or Syria, or Yemen, or Ukraine, or Gaza, or even certain neighborhoods in St. Louis. Father Dempsey suggests that this work is not without hope, though, for bleeding through the canvas is gold, signaling a compassionate God who identifies with those who have suffered and died, and the paschal mystery of Christian faith in which new life can arise from death. I'm not sure if Tracy would use that language or endorse that interpretation. However, Christopher Rincon made this observation about Tracy's gold paintings from the 1970s, one of which is on display now, not in the exhibition but elsewhere in the museum. Christopher said, quote, "The philosophy behind the gold paintings was to remove the figures. We, the viewers, become the actors whose lives are sacramentalized in front of these gold paintings, the sacred space." Close quote. In April of 2018, 25 years after the triptych was installed, and following an extensive 7-month conservation project, I'd be happy to tell you about that later, it was quite an adventure, Tracy's cruise to Bishop Oscar Romero, martyr of El Salvador, or more simply, the Romero Cross, went on display at MOCRA. In the late 1970s, when El Salvador was convulsed with social and political turmoil, Archbishop Oscar Romero denounced the perpetrators of violence, often by name, and demanded justice for victims. Considered a prophet by the oppressed, Romero drew the ire of those in power. On March 24, 1980, he was shot and killed by a sniper's bullet while he said Mass in a hospital chapel. Tracy chanced upon a tabloid magazine left on the seat of a bus in Mexico City and was riveted by a picture of Romero in his dying moments. Tracy began to read more about Romero and the context of conflict and injustice in Central America, especially the involvement of the U.S. government and military. He also became versed in liberation theology, which insists that the Christian cannot remain indifferent to the plight of the poor and marginalized, and must work to dismantle unjust social structures. In the 1987 Terminal Privileges exhibition catalog, Tracy wrote, quote, "The religious truths of this war, as found in A Theology of Liberation by Gustavo Gutierrez, my original source of inspiration, remain unchanged. My bitter, heartbreaking rage and frustrating thirst for justice exist unquenched." Close quote. And we should note that Father Gutierrez passed away last October, just a few months after Tracy's death. In response to these catalysts, Tracy created the Romero Cross, completing it in 1981. The work has been seen worldwide in prominent venues, including the 1982 Venice Biennale, MoMA PS1 in New York, and the Menil Collection in Houston. As you can see, the cross has had different configurations over the years. Meanwhile, after decades in which Oscar Romero was celebrated by some and vilified by others, even within the Catholic Church, he was canonized as a saint in 2018. The principal component of the Romero cross is an upright column consisting of a central cross to which are secured 2 smaller crosses. The crosses are impaled with numerous nails and spikes, violent transformations that are a ritual and tangible embodiment of the forces that impact people's lives, including the assassin's bullet that ripped through Monsignor Romero's heart. 16 bull horns project from the crosses. Tracy resisted the links some scholars made to bullfighting or Picasso's Guernica. Rather pointing to the long history of bull cults across time and geography, Tracy recalled Romero's strength of character and will, his role in protecting and championing his people, but also the way in which he was sacrificed. Almost 40 sculptural objects of varying sizes and shapes are suspended from the spikes by ropes made of braided cloth. Similar objects are seen on the Cruz de la Paz Sagrada 7 in the Elegy of Distance. Tracy refers to these as iconitos, little icons, an allusion to the late medieval Sienese devotional paintings from which he derived their forms. Tracy noted, quote, "The support without the image is as interesting to me as the contentual impulse and intention of the image. If the painting and gold chips off, the purity of the intention is present in the very form of the structure itself." Close quote. The iconitos lack pictorial images for viewers to grab hold of, but the intensely saturated colors, thickly textured surfaces, and encrustations trigger an immediacy of sensation and experience. The iconitos also serve as a stand-in for the milagros Tracy uses in other works from this period, as seen in Flower Sacrifice on display in the exhibition. A milagro, meaning miracle in Spanish, is a manifestation of faith and piety. Appearing in a variety of shapes, sizes, and materials, milagros are frequently attached to altars, shrines, and plaques in places of worship. The iconitos might be seen as milagros, attached to the central cross, representing the prayers of the faithful seeking intercession through Romero. A close examination of the braided cords suspending the iconitos reveals that many have human hair braided into them. The Altar de los Olvidados in the exhibition makes strong use of this element. The hair alludes to the practice of poor women selling their hair for wigs, as well as hair's ritual use as a vehicle of power in some belief systems. In the Catholic context, we might also think of the role of relics in the cult of the saints. The crosses and iconitos rest on a platform with 2 wooden poles passing through it, wrapped in violet silk that suggests the liturgical colors of Advent and Lent, the season we'll enter into this week on Ash Wednesday. The configuration is reminiscent of pasos, that is, religious images or statues carried on platforms in processions through the streets during religious festivals, especially during Holy Week. The whole assembly sits on a larger two-tiered wooden platform, and 2 framed news clippings rest on the lower tier. The larger picture, draped with a stole, is from the tabloid article that brought Romero to Tracy's attention. Lo consideran ya un santo. It proclaims, although of course we know it took almost 40 years for Romero to be formally canonized. The gruesome black and white photo might affect contemporary viewers more deeply than traditional representations of classical martyrs. The flowers accumulated around the base of the Romero cross give the piece the feel of a grave or memorial. Indeed, at MOCRA, we regularly add fresh flowers on the anniversary of Romero's assassination in March, just a few weeks from now, and in early November to mark the 1989 killings of 6 Jesuits at the Central American University in San Salvador, along with their housekeeper and her teenage daughter. In MOCRA's former chapel space, the Romero cross assumes the aspect of a shrine, a place of pilgrimage and reflection. While the triptych and Romero cross are key examples of Tracy's work at the height of his presence in the art world, the Elegy of Distance reminds us that we shouldn't pigeonhole an artist as protean as Michael Tracy. And so I'll end with a work that might be Tracy's version of a via negativa approach, an apophatic work that speaks by not speaking. This work, now on display at MOCRA, is a model for the over 16-foot wide Retablo de la Paz Sagrada, located in the subterranean Emmanuel Chapel in the Crypt of the Bishops at the Catholic Cathedral in Corpus Christi. It's a remarkably understated work, with simple, clean geometric lines. Squares of gold leaf are applied irregularly over the reddish clay underpainting. While perhaps Tracy wasn't concerned for precisely positioning the gold leaf on this model, the effect suggests a metaphor for the meeting of the mortal, the clay, and the divine, the gold, that takes place in a sacred space such as a chapel. Once again, we encounter Michael Tracy at the borderline between different realities. So today's talk bears the title Seen and Unseen, and I hope that over the course of the past hour, I have been able to make visible some of the ways in which artists continue to engage with the sacred and spiritual dimensions. At the same time, I hope I've conveyed a healthy respect for the limits of art, language, or any human expression in attempting to convey the numinous. This has been our focus at MOCRA for over 30 years now, and if any of what I have shared has piqued your interest, I invite you to visit our website, explore our MOCRA Voices media content, or follow us on social media. And I thank you for your kind attention today.